Everything shared here is for educational purposes and personal reflection only, not medical advice. Always work with your own healthcare provider for individual care. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Inner Script. So, I have a fun episode here today, and it's something that I kind of went down the rabbit hole with because of my own personal experience. And it's really going to blend science and something a little bit more energetic, which is just so me. I love blending kind of my Eastern and Western sides, my science and energetic sides, because I think it builds off one another. You really can't have one thing without the other. I truly believe that. So it's really talking about physiology and identity. And even more specific to that, it's hormones and ambition, because I don't think high functioning women burn out just because of hormones. And I don't think ambition is just personality. I really think ambition goes back to kind of neurobiology. And what kind of led me down this pathway or this rabbit hole, as I mentioned, is my own experience with burnout, being in such an overfunctioning mode, and really thinking about this in terms of ambition and why are higher functioning women more likely to burn out than somebody else? Is it social conditioning? Is it personality? Is it neurobiology? I was asking myself all of these questions because I recently started a new job in a longevity startup company. It's the first time I've ever felt in a job just so aligned, so calm, and just this inner peace. I really can't believe the functioning I was doing before in my traditional kind of Western medicine, primary care job as a nurse practitioner. It really kind of honestly took some getting used to not being in this high alert mode anymore. And my nervous system was recalibrating almost. On top of it, I was noticing so much more energy and my sleep was improving, but I was still kind of like my nervous system still felt like on high alert. And I even noticed, within the first 4 weeks, I would say, of starting this new job, my heart rate variability on my Aura ring had kind of plummeted. It definitely dropped back to kind of my depletion mode when I was really going through it with some of my ailments, I would say. So it got me thinking, my body, my nervous system was still kind of on this high alert mode, seeking out this threat because I'm not seeing patients back to back anymore. I'm having such a better work-life balance and I'm sleeping better, as I mentioned, but my nervous system is trying to kind of keep up with that. And it was a really good reminder for me because I hate to say it, I definitely went back into this like kind of panic mode. I was like, oh my God, what's going on? Why am I taking like 5 steps backwards when I feel really well? And I just realized it was my body was just recalibrating. And it was just such a good reminder for me. And it kind of led me down this rabbit hole of what is the science behind nervous system recalibration? What is the science behind ambition over functioning? Like, why does this happen to women more than men in my experience? So we're going to get into it. But, as I mentioned, it got me thinking about all of this ambition. Is it a personality trait? Is it more than that? And I really kind of started to think about it in terms of neurobiology. And that really goes back to our physiology. And it can go back to hormones, neurotransmitters, what that looks like for specific people, especially in high functioning women. So let's kind of get into it. And we're going to blend this science and energetics. So I just think it's such a cool topic. And as I mentioned, I really went down a rabbit hole with it. I want to start off by saying I think burnout is often misalignment between your nervous system, your hormonal rhythm, and honestly, the identity you built around performance and output. We're going to talk about why ambitious women are more likely to burn out, what's happening in the brain, why calm can feel destabilizing after chaos, which I can 1000% speak to, and how to evolve ambition without kind of losing your edge. This isn't about shrinking, it's about refinement. Okay, so let's kind of get into why high functioning women burn out. I'm going to start off by saying, after more than a decade of working in healthcare, I've noticed something hard to ignore, a pattern. And the majority of the patients I see presenting with autoimmune diseases, gut dysfunction, chronic fatigue, inflammatory skin conditions, hormonal imbalances, or just systemic inflammation in general are women. And we could argue that I would say this is a huge generalization, but I think women seek out medical care more so than men. So there could be a portion of that, absolutely. But I think overarching theme here in my experience is kind of seeing more women with this. I would say almost all of these conditions share one common upstream driver, which is inflammation. And one of the strongest drivers of chronic inflammation is cortisol dysregulation. It's a nervous system that has been overactivated for far too long. And I want to say cortisol is not the enemy, okay? We need cortisol. Cortisol serves a purpose. And when I say to kind of get people to understand is cortisol is like that one person we all know who is great around, who is really great in small doses, but then after a while, we need a break. We kind of need to get away from them because it can be a lot. That's how I explain cortisol to make sense. Specifically, cortisol wakes you up. It mobilizes glucose, which is energy. It keeps you alert and it helps you respond to stress. But again, cortisol is meant to kind of rise and fall in rhythm. And it's not meant to stay in this elevated state for years, which happens to so many of us. And when cortisol does remain elevated, it leads to progesterone getting suppressed. In females, sleep architecture gets fragmented, meaning, you're having issues falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up at weird times, unable to fall back asleep, maybe needing naps throughout the day. Blood sugar can destabilize, inflammatory cytokines increase, which is just basically your immune system kind of going haywire, releasing various types of white blood cells because it's detecting a threat or an injury, whether it's emotional or physical. The cytokines get released as a way to compensate and kind of take care of our body, but then that causes inflammation to increase. So it's really like a compensatory mechanism. And then the body starts to prioritize survival over repair. And here's the key for women and why this matters so much in women is progesterone is your calming hormone. Progesterone and cortisol compete with one another, essentially. Specifically, progesterone helps to buffer stress. It stabilizes your mood, it supports sleep, and it counterbalances estrogen. But progesterone is easily suppressed by chronic stress because they are competing with each other, and our body starts to prioritize survival because cortisol becomes over required. So then we're producing the cortisol instead of the progesterone. So that's why a lot of women specifically notice their symptoms worsen in their luteal phase, which is after ovulation, before menstruation, because your progesterone is supposed to rise at that time. And we don't have the capabilities for the progesterone to get produced because we're just so stressed out that we're in this kind of low progesterone state and then a high estrogen state on top of that because the ratio is off. So that's why a lot of people deal with kind of this luteal phase dysfunction of what some people call it. I've been there and it's terrible. So what we see clinically is, again, this kind of estrogen dominance, and it can be due to, again, too much estrogen, but a lot of the times it's due to high estrogen relative to progesterone because that ratio is off. And again, we see it more so in the luteal phase a lot of the times, especially initially because your progesterone isn't spiking. So some symptoms of estrogen dominance are water retention, breast tenderness, jawline acne, PMS amplification. Like, you literally cannot control your emotions at this time if you don't have enough progesterone. Waking up consistently at 3 a.m. or even like 1 to 3 a.m., feeling wired but exhausted, subtle hair shedding, and low stress tolerance. We label it hormonal imbalance, but hormones are often downstream with all of this. Hey friend, it would mean so much if you left a quick rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more women find these conversations, and it truly energizes me and keeps this podcast going. What is the upstream driver? The upstream driver is a nervous system that no longer feels safe because of overfunctioning. So let's get into the energetic layer, which is like my favorite piece. I love this so much, and just my energetic side, because it often gets overlooked and it's called, people say it's woo-woo, but there's actually science behind energy. Everything is created by or with energy. So let's get into it. So when I talk about specifically masculine and feminine energy, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking about physiology. Masculine energy is linear. Think output, structure, achievement, forward motion. And feminine energy is cyclical. So you think of rhythm, intuition, recovery, receiving. I want to be clear. Every human has both masculine and feminine energy, but it exists on a spectrum. So certain people can have male or female or non-binary, however you identify, will have a certain amount of masculine and feminine energy just based on social conditioning, biology, physiology, kind of your own wiring. What I will say is bodies, not just gender, but bodies with cyclical hormonal symptoms are not designed to function like linear machines. So think about anybody with a menstrual cycle. Feminine energy is meant to be cyclical. And that goes with our hormones. Our hormones are cyclical. So that means there are certain periods of time where we're meant to slow down, listen to our bodies, have less energy at certain times of the month because our bodies are wired based on cycles. Unfortunately, our culture rewards linear output, producing every day, perform every day, ignore internal shifts, be consistent, be sharp, be ahead, no matter where you're at in kind of your feminine energy or your cycle. That right there is misalignment. You're really not honoring yourself. If your physiology is cyclical, but your lifestyle is rigid, your nervous system will eventually protest. Not because you are weak, because you're not built to override biology indefinitely. Every day when we wake up, we're going to feel differently, whether male, female, whatever. We override those internal cues to just keep going, keep producing, and continue to give ourselves or give our job 100%, but our 100% looks differently every day. So it's kind of honoring those fluctuations in your physiology and your energy, which a lot of us tend to override. Now let's talk about ambition. Ambition is not just personality. It's dopamine. Dopamine is the brain's motivation and reward neurotransmitter. It fires in anticipation, not just success. It responds to progress, deadlines, pressure, being needed, being evaluated, being praised, being relied upon. So if you're ambitious, your dopamine system likely fires often and you feel rewarded by achievement, solving problems, competence, being indispensable. But here's the nuance here. Dopamine adapts. If you spend years in high output environments, your brain normalizes high stimulation. Urgency becomes baseline. Chaos becomes familiar. You become sharp in activation because you kind of compensate and there's no other option but to adapt. And your nervous system starts associating activation with power. And then we layer female physiology onto that. Estrogen increases dopamine sensitivity, it amplifies reward, and it can heighten that drive and reactivity. And progesterone strengthens executive control. It enhances inhibitory signaling and it buffers impulsivity. So when you have low progesterone, you can become more impulsive, especially in decision making. I just find that so fascinating. Because of this, with progesterone and estrogen and how dopamine is affected in the brain, ambition in women is cyclical. But if cortisol remains chronically elevated, progesterone drops, which means less buffering, more reactivity, more drive without regulation. And that's when ambition becomes compulsion. That's when rest feels unsafe, stillness feels threatening, and slowing down feels like disappearing or just even against the grain or against your nature, which is crazy. I want to talk about kind of recalibration after burnout, which is, I would say right now I'm starting to get out of it, and just such a fascinating concept to me or for me is this whole recalibration phase after you're getting out of a very high output environment. So this is, again, I would say this is where I am right now. I'm definitely getting out of it, I would say. I've noticed an improvement in some of the things I was noticing before. But as I mentioned earlier, I started a new job recently. It's very aligned, it's expansive. I have so much more freedom and just more autonomy and less urgency. There's not so much rigidity in my scheduling. And I'm also working with very like-minded people where we are all passionate about optimal health and wellness and nutrition and exercise. And we all just have this kind of shared drive of really wanting to help people optimize their health and wellness. And it's just been such a cool experience so far. I'll name drop where I'm working. It's called Eternal, and it's, again, a longevity wellness center. We have locations in both San Francisco and New York City. It's very geared towards people who kind of identify themselves as just very active. You could say athlete, but I think it's kind of more like peak living for active people, or just honestly peak living for anyone that just wants to optimize their health and wellness. And, there's performance coaches who help do kind of performance-based assessments to look at VO2 max, which looks at kind of like exercise and endurance capacity. They look at strength and mobility, DEXA scans, and we look at a good amount of biomarkers for blood testing to kind of see where everyone is at. And we all come up with a plan, and there's registered dietitians. So it's just such a collaborative, supportive environment. And we're all just happy to be there. And I've never really experienced something like that before. So I really can't emphasize enough about this place. Yeah, as I mentioned, just feels very aligned right now. And my sleep has been the best it's been in years. My inflammation is down, but as I mentioned, my HRV, my heart rate variability, dipped at first for like 4 weeks. It went from being in the 60s on average to getting into like the 30s, back into like my depleted state like a year and a half ago. So I kind of panicked and I had this moment of confusion and I was kind of spiraling a little bit, I will admit. I was asking myself, if I'm calmer, why does my nervous system look like it's stressed? And then I realized, what if I'm not stressed? What if I'm recalibrating? Because again, we are so used to instant gratification as a culture, myself included. Hello, look at what happened to me, that I didn't allow myself time for my body to adapt and recalibrate after I was in this crazy work environment situation where I was so overworked, so burnt out, always on, doing, like zero rest emotionally, mentally. And I fell into that kind of category of somebody who just wanted instant gratification and for all my problems to go away once I got out of that situation. And it just doesn't work like that. I was in a high work stress environment for 2.5 years. Like, obviously there's going to be some recalibration and integration period where just we need to give our bodies a little bit more slack. So I just thought that was so, I don't know, I kind of laughed at myself. I'm like, God, Stephanie, come on. You talk about this stuff all the time and you just did it. But yeah, so, I realized when you leave this high activation environment, your nervous system isn't going to immediately relax. It adjusts, it adapts, and it can take time. And your heart rate variability dips before it rises, which basically looks at, HRV, which I've mentioned a good amount here, heart rate variability. It basically looks at how well your nervous system is recovering to stress, physical activity, and lower ranges, like in the 30s, kind of can tell us that you're having some difficulty recovering versus, the higher you are, shows there's just more variability in how well your body is able to kind of bounce back and how resilient your nervous system is. So that's basically what it's looking at. And, sometimes calm can feel really destabilizing before it feels peaceful. And because your system is learning this new regulation without urgency, it's kind of a new skill almost to like, oh my gosh, the thread is gone. What do I do now? It's kind of, I had this moment of like, okay, who am I without urgency and output and production? Like, who the hell am I? If you're not needed at 100% capacity, who are you? If you're not the sharpest, fastest, most reliable person in the room, who are you? And there was this version of me that became extremely efficient in chaos. I felt validated. I felt competent. I felt like I could just hold my shit together no matter what. But she was activated 100% of the time at work. Activation for such a long period of time can start to feel like power, but urgency and power are not the same thing. What I will say, even now that I've had so much more energy, I'm like trying to figure out what to do with it, because I used to leave work feeling so depleted and just exhausted. I knew I was burnt out and I definitely felt tired, but I really didn't realize the level of how I was operating until I left that job. And I really can't believe what I was feeling and doing day after day. I realized, I was like, I have all of this energy. I need to do something. And I started running again. I used to run a good amount. Like, I was never a huge long distance runner, but I would love to, maybe like do Tabata sprints or interval sprints after a workout, or go for like 2 to 3 mile fast run. And I really wasn't able to do that for the past like 2.5 years or even longer, because I felt so exhausted and so depleted. Thinking about running like made me even more tired. And so now I'm getting back into running, and it's something I really loved, and that's been feeling really good. But I'm also being careful not to overdo it. So we're starting small. We're going like 2-mile runs at the most right now. So we're integrating, adapting, and recalibrating, and not trying to overdo it. And kind of to tie this back into high functioning women, a lot of us were praised early for being mature, being responsible, handling things alone, hyper independence, being the caretaker, being easy, being high achieving. And all of this had to do with producing and output. So, you ask yourselves, what did your nervous system learn at this time? That safety comes from competence, love comes from usefulness, belonging comes from overfunctioning. And over time, that really starts to become your identity. And when identity is tied to output, rest can feel like a threat, a physical threat. And it's not because you don't deserve rest, but it's because your nervous system equates stillness with loss of relevance. Don't get me wrong. Ambition is healthy drive, and it can even be nervous system strategy, but a strategy that's to stay needed, stay valuable, stay safe. When you start to remove those constant dopamine spikes that's tied to ambition and production and praise, producing, all of that, your reward circuitry will start to recalibrate. And during this recalibration, you may feel restless, flat, less stimulated, or kind of unsure of your edge and almost like, am I doing enough? That doesn't mean you're regressing. It means your system is learning that calm does not equal invisible. And all of this, none of this is, I want to be clear, it's not about shrinking ambition. Ambition is amazing. It's a beautiful thing. It's such a good quality to have. It's such an attractive quality to have, but it's really about integrating it. I think integrated ambition can look like drive without compulsion, power without urgency, leadership without overproduction mode, output followed by recovery. And I think the most powerful women I know are not constantly activated. They are regulated. Think about somebody that goes into a room who is just moving without urgency, but confident. They're calm. They give off even inner peace. They're competent, but they're not in this production mode, and they're just walking with ease, with confidence, without urgency. And I think that's like such a magnetic thing, especially as a female, because you're just in your body. Yeah, you're not seeking all of this external validation for producing. And I think if you think about that versus, somebody who walks in with urgency, frazzled, and is like speaking really fast, blah, 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 it's going to have such a different energy versus someone who is calm, collected, and powerful. Yeah, it's moving intentionally, recovering deeply, and not performing urgency and not confusing exhaustion with worth. It's possible to build, lead, be visible, earn, expand, and still honor this cyclical rhythm. And that integration, I think, is power. So I want to leave you with a few questions. Where are you overriding yourself? Where are you proving instead of pacing? Where are you mistaking activation for strength? And even who are you without production? And burnout is not weakness. It's a body that can no longer sustain a script it didn't write. And recalibration is not regression. It's evolution. Ambition is not pathology, but when urgency becomes your identity, your nervous system will pay the price. And sometimes the most powerful thing an ambitious woman can do is prove to herself that she can feel calm and still feel powerful. That's not softness, that's mastery, in my opinion. And just to end on this, I am now kind of in this period where I feel like my body is recalibrating and, I'm adjusting to this new work normal. And it's been really cool to kind of feel calm and not showing up to chaos every day. And I know that is such a blessing, and I am so grateful for that. And not everyone is in that situation. But, I think there's a lot of other things we can do to kind of regulate ourselves and kind of keep this calm but powerful energy, showing up in a way where we honor ourselves and not outsource our power, and continue to stay true to ourselves, honor our cycles, honor our energy, and kind of reframe that rest is productive, and not to put so much emphasis on, what we produce is who we are, because that's not the case. And it can be difficult to reframe that. And that's something I'm still trying to learn how to do, is not put so much emphasis on what I am producing, because that's not just who I am. I'm a lot more than that. So that's where I'm going to end today. Let me know what you think of this episode. Please rate, review, subscribe to all the things wherever you listen to podcasts. It makes such a huge difference. It allows this podcast to grow and become visible. And I have been enjoying this so much with you guys every week. So feel free to send me a DM with any questions, comments on the Inner Script Pod on Instagram, and I will chat with you guys next week. If you want to connect with like-minded women and dive deeper into these conversations, join my Patreon community. There's a free option, and it's where we can talk about each episode together. The link is in the show notes, and I can't wait to see you there.